Governments need Bitcoin. So that's absolutely true. But it's not the reverse. And so I think that people get confused. They think that we're somehow like lobbying for special favors when really what we're doing is we're lobbying for the public interest, right? Which is that as citizens of this country, we want a government that is not dysfunctional. We want a government that is actually, performing its duties. Now, we can get into a debate about anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism and all of that. I don't think that the general public is interested in that debate. So we kind of have to accept that reality as well and look at what's good for the Commonwealth.
Hello, Pierre. Good to see you. Hope all is well.
Thank you. Yes, all is well. Good. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Well, is all well? I think a lot of things have happened in the last week or two that I think has been very new to Bitcoiners, and I think Bitcoiners are getting their first kind of introduction into politics. I think we've been living in the shadows for a very long time, and all of a sudden we were just kind of thrown into this. I think a lot of that came from Operation Choke Point 2.0 that caused our industry to react. I think the Republican Party saw that as an opportunity to potentially get voters. And boom, here we are. The pros, the repeal of SAB 121, of course, the end of Operation Choke Point, which I think is extremely positive. The support for the mining industry, I believe in the executive order, the support for self-custody. And then the, how do I put this nicely? The altcoin extravaganza and the Trump coin release 3 days before inauguration. And of course, the freedom of Ross. So I think a lot of people are confused right now. They're like, you know what? He did a lot of good, but this Trump coin thing, I don't know how I'm feeling about it. So Pierre, where are we right now? What's going on? How do we make sense of this?
Yeah, we're certainly winning. And I think that at the end of the day, look, we're not going to win every time. And arguably, when Trump issues a meme coin, in my mind, that's winning too much, right? And then we start asking him to, we don't want to win so much, but we gotta accept reality, and that's a complete contrast to where we were a couple months ago, and I think it's great. So I don't have any complaints. I mean, at the end of the day, look, Bitcoin's going to win in the market. It's not going to win by having government endorsement or by us, criticizing altcoins on Twitter. It's all about the market dynamics and monetary economics. And that's something I've written about for more than a decade now. And there's nothing has changed in that regard. I don't worry about Trump flipping Bitcoin anytime soon.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I completely agree with you, Pierre, and perhaps I'm not able to articulate it as well as you, but the way that I see it is Bitcoin doesn't need any special privileges or help by the state. Bitcoin's going to win because of its incentives and because of its characteristics. Go ahead.
Well, that's correct. I would just add that governments need Bitcoin. So that's absolutely true. But it's not the reverse. And so I think that people get confused. They think that we're somehow like lobbying for special favors when really what we're doing is we're lobbying for the public interest, right? Which is that as citizens of this country, we want a government that is not dysfunctional. We want a government that is actually, performing its duties. Now, we can get into a debate about anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism and all of that. I don't think that the general public is interested in that debate. So we kind of have to accept that reality as well and look at what's good for the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and perhaps people are not like well versed in this, which is, why is it good for the Commonwealth? Why is it good for people that the U.S. government acquires Bitcoin? What is the benefit to them?
So first and foremost, the benefit for whether it's the government, a corporation, or an individual, is to strengthen your balance sheet, right? So when you look at a balance sheet, you've got assets and you've got liabilities. Today, the government has a lot of liabilities, and it doesn't have a lot of assets. And the assets it does have are pretty low quality, right? It's gold, right? So nobody other than Peter Schiff thinks gold is a high quality asset. The other asset or potential asset the government has is taxes, right? And so they always say, oh, the dollar's backed by taxes, or it's backed by the military. Now, let's be clear from an accounting perspective. With all due respect to our armed forces, the military is an expenditure. It's not an asset. It is a rapidly depreciating. It's a liability. And so, at the end of the day, what we want is for the government to have a strong balance sheet in order to be able to fulfill its basic functions, right? Which is providing for the territorial integrity of the United States. Now, when we look at the liabilities, people say, "Oh, we got to cut spending, we've got to get rid of entitlement programs and all of this." Maybe, but look, that's not what voters are asking for, okay? And that's certainly not what politicians are promising. And so, if we want to have a way of exiting the fiat Ponzi scheme, the only way to do that in a graceful manner, in a way that harms as few people as possible, is by accumulating Bitcoin on the government's balance sheet. Ideally, through printing dollars. I think that's probably the best way to swap things out, or to issue bonds, or to sell low-quality assets like gold, and to buy Bitcoin. So there's lots of different ways that could be accomplished. But it's really, when we look at hyperbitcoinization, do we really want people to have the dollar essentially collapse under their feet, and to be left with nothing? Or do we want to slowly essentially swap out dollars with Bitcoin, right? To where, if they print lots of dollars to buy Bitcoin, eventually $1 equals one Satoshi. And we can just, use them interchangeably, right? So I think that would be the best future for the people. As much as I'd like for everyone to get educated about Bitcoin and to learn how to use a cold card and to go on river.com and set up a DCA and stack sats, what we found is that a significant percentage of the population is cognitively incapable of accomplishing those tasks. And so what we want to do is essentially turn the dollar into a layer 21 scaling solution.
So much to unpack there. And also, Pierre, big fan of your dry humor. The thing that you did at the end just gave me like a quick glimpse of the video that you did that just absolutely trolled the New York Times. Okay. Anyways, back to the topic. So what happens, Pierre, when central banks that have unlimited money printers start to use those money printers to buy something that has absolute scarcity? Something's got to give, right?
So one theory I've heard is that it would cause the value of those fiat currencies to go down and that you would have inflation. I think that's actually very misguided. So take, for example, what MicroStrategy is doing, right? So they are issuing MicroStrategy shares to buy Bitcoin. Has that caused the price of MicroStrategy shares to go down? Have they gotten, have the shareholders been complaining about all of the dilution? No, of course not, because it's financing a high quality asset on the balance sheet. And so I think that it would actually cause the fiat currencies to strengthen because they are de facto being backed by Bitcoin. And anything backed by Bitcoin is going to strengthen if you believe that Bitcoin's a high quality asset. And so what really happens is that the price of Bitcoin goes up. That's where the quote unquote inflation is. It's not in the consumer prices, right? It's not in the price of eggs that the price of eggs would go up. No, it's the price of Bitcoin that would go up. And that it also cause a bit of a feedback loop, right? A game theory of people trying to buy Bitcoin because they know that other people are trying to buy Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin's price I think it's going to go up forever. That's something that a lot of I've heard on other podcasts. People say it's going to go up forever. I agree with that, and so it would only accelerate the process, which is good because at the end of the day, this is what we need to have happen in order to have hyper Bitcoinization.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things too that I want to focus on, which is, and you're saying it earlier, which is eventually one sat is gonna equal $1, and I think is that $10 million Bitcoin? Am I
$100 million Bitcoin? Yeah. But you heard it here first, folks.
And what was it? The very famous. It was the Preston podcast. What did he say exactly? That was hilarious.
So this was back in 2017 when Bitcoin was a very small asset, small market cap. Preston predicted that the market cap would go to $1 trillion. And I quickly added per Bitcoin to just have some fun. But here we are. The market cap's at $2 trillion. So Preston was correct, but I will be correct as well one day.
Yeah, 100%. And let me ask you something else too, Pierre, because the market cap is a lot bigger, right? And as the market cap gets a lot bigger, it's obviously you can make an argument that the volatility starts to decrease. I mean, we did see like a 50% gain, in a matter of a month or so. And it's kind of been chopping sideways. Is Bitcoin becoming boring? Like, is the volatility just, getting sucked out? Like, I think all of us are remembering, and I was around these days, are remembering the 2017 era where we saw like a 20x within a year. I think 2021 was a little bit of a letdown. I have my own theories. I think the China mining ban played a big role in the 2021 bull market kind of being cut short. But are Bitcoin's glory days over, Pierre Rochard?
No, I don't think so. So as far as the volatility is concerned, I think that it has been trending down, but trending down from a position that was really extraordinary in terms of volatility, and so it's all relative, right? So the volatility is volatile itself if you look at it kind of in the second degree, and that. What happens when the Bitcoin price increases and when the market cap increases is that it actually makes Bitcoin an opportunity for bigger bags, right? So it would really have been impossible for somebody to come into the market 10 years ago and buy $10 billion worth of Bitcoin, or buy $40 billion worth of Bitcoin, which I believe is what MicroStrategy has accomplished. And so it creates an opportunity for new participants, which obviously are going to be institutional, right? Bigger dollar amounts, whether it's corporations or governments or high net worth individuals. Will the volatility continue to decrease? I think so, but up to a limit, because ultimately the supply is capped. And so if you have a fixed supply asset and demand is variable and demand is volatile, because humans are volatile, right? We're all like unhinged emotional creatures who are constantly swinging between bull and bear sentiment. I think Bitcoin will continue to be volatile for a while. What's really interesting too is like when we unpack what MicroStrategy is doing with securitizing Bitcoin's returns and repackaging that volatility and selling it, maybe that's a catalyst that drives down the volatility. So once you start selling the volatility, you have less of it, and so they're creating these options markets and derivatives that I think that are going to contribute to stabilizing Bitcoin's price long term. But we can't escape the fundamental reality, which is that the herd mentality of people all trying to buy Bitcoin at the same time, and so that's going to continue to happen, and that's going to mean that Bitcoin's price, It's impossible for the value to just increase by like 0.5% every day in kind of a constant terminology, because traders look at that, they start leveraging up, they start piling in, and then that they get wrecked, and then they get liquidated, and then the price goes down. So I think it'll continue to be volatile, but it's all relative. I think it'll be less volatile than the past. In terms of are Bitcoin's glory days behind it, It depends on, whether you're a hipster or whether you're a winner. And so the hipsters will always be doom posting on Twitter that, Bitcoin has changed and that, it's not interesting anymore. But the winners will continue to be excited about Bitcoin's continued path to glory.
Absolutely. I mean, the micro, I want to talk a little bit about MicroStrategy, which is, I don't think anyone expected the stock price to do what it did this year, like 5x. I believe MicroStrategy's market cap was 1 billion when he started the strategy, and I think it reached 100 billion. Like, that's insane. And I think, from a much smaller level, of course, what I've done for me on an individual level, and then from Simply Bitcoin's perspective, like, if TLDR, if you have Bitcoin on your treasury, it is a freaking cheat code. It is a cheat code. Your runway just keeps getting bigger. It's like, it's a cheat code. I don't know how else to say it. But of course, MicroStrategy is able to leverage the public markets. They're able to leverage their company. And I believe American Hodl said it's a vampire attack against the dollar, or a speculative attack against the dollar. What is the mechanism? What exactly are they doing? How are they able to continue to raise more money to buy more Bitcoin? They continue to do this over and over again. Their stock price continues to rise. I don't think a lot of people are understanding the mechanism or the phenomenon that is happening.
Yeah, great question. So the term speculative attack was actually a term invented by Paul Krugman, who used to be a real economist until he became a political hack and a blogger. But back when he was a real economist, he studied currency markets. And what a speculative attack is you have a speculator, let's call him, a hedge fund. Famously, George Soros did this back in the 90s. He would borrow a weak currency, sell it to buy a strong currency, wait for the strong currency to appreciate in value, and then pay off the debt that was in a weak currency using the appreciated asset. And so he would do this, with the British pound and the dollar. Now, what Saylor is doing is the same thing, except that the dollar is the weak currency and Bitcoin is the strong currency. And so he borrows dollars using a convertible bond, and then he pays off that convertible bond after the price of Bitcoin has gone up. Now, I'm simplifying here because there's also the intermediate mechanics of the equity of MSTR itself, which is bridging these two worlds, but the economic substance of it is the same. And so it does raise a question of, okay, well, how does the dollar defend itself against a speculative attack like this? Well, it's exactly what I described at the beginning of the episode, which is that the dollar itself has to engage in a speculative defense by acquiring Bitcoin to back its value and to strengthen it. Now, will they do that? We'll see. Treasury Secretary, he was just confirmed, actually, Scott Bessent. He understands what a speculative attack is, 100%, because he worked with George Soros when they were doing this. So nobody understands this better than our current Treasury Secretary. How he's going to manage it, I think, will be really interesting to see over the next 4 years, assuming he serves out the full 4 years. I think he will. If we look back at the previous Trump administration, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin was one of the only cabinet secretaries that served out the whole term. So I think that that's an omen for what's to come. And I think Bessent is brilliant, and that he will recognize the smart way to strengthen the dollar, because the stupid way, which is probably what Janet Yellen and Marty Greenberg and the Warrenites were thinking, is that you impose capital controls, right? So that you prevent people from buying Bitcoin. And they tried to do this with Operation Choke Point 2.0. They aggressively imposed capital controls to prevent, and SOB 121 as well, to prevent the banking system from engaging with this world. But that's burying your head in the sand, right? That's not really addressing the underlying issue, which is that you have a weak currency. And so, acquiring Bitcoin is one way to strengthen the currency. just balancing the budget, cutting spending, reinvigorating the economy, deregulation. These are all very smart ways to strengthen the currency. And I think that's what the intent of the Trump administration is over the next 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the exciting part to me, Pierre, is how many cabinet members in the Trump administration have exposure to Bitcoin. So I believe I saw David Bailey in a live stream at Michael Saylor's 100K party claim that Trump owns a lot of Bitcoin, number one. Number two, we have confirmation that JD Vance, the vice president, owns Bitcoin. Pete Hegseth, who just confirmed as Secretary of Defense, I believe, there's a video of him on media basically saying, like, I sold some Bitcoin, but I still own Bitcoin. And of course, RFK Jr., who's yet to be confirmed, but of course, he confirmed around the Bitcoin conference that the majority of his words, not mine, of his net worth is in Bitcoin. So talk about alignment of incentives. Now, before we explore the topic of Operation Choke Point 2.0, because it's fascinating. We covered it tremendously on our side last year. I went from a process of being like, you know what? They're just not educated on the matter to thinking it was 100% malicious. And I think the whole industry kind of went through that process. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about the recent executive order that was released by Trump. I think a lot of Bitcoiners were expecting that it was just going to include Bitcoin. But as you pointed out on X, there was a lot of pressure lobbying wise from Ripple. And for anyone who doesn't remember, Ripple actually donated to the opposing political party last year, to the Kamala campaign. And also they're actively, promoting worldwide the rollout of central bank digital currencies. So how did that lobbying work? What other insights could you give us on that topic, Pierre?
Yeah, so the Ripple and its executive team, they were expecting Kamala to win in November, and they were positioning themselves for that, so that they could get a CBDC here in the U.S. that would be built on their technology. But I think we have to look at the history of Ripple to understand the present reality. And the history of Ripple is really all about issuing press releases to pretend that they have an in with institutions, whether it's banks or with governments, in order to get retail investors to buy their XRPs and to essentially be the exit liquidity for these XRP bags that were 100% pre-mined. And I don't know that pre-mined is the right word for it too, because there's no mining at all in Ripple or the Ripple ledger. But essentially, it's just fiat, right? They just created it out of thin air and handed it to themselves. And they've been using it in order to buy press releases, and to get logos onto PowerPoint presentations. And so, and to get their token listed on exchanges as well. So, of course, any smart politician, if you give them millions of dollars, they'll have dinner with you and you can take a picture with them. But that doesn't really mean anything. And so I think that we have to take Ripple's lobbying with a grain of salt. And I think that at the end of the day, politicians are smart enough to understand that any kind of decision they make is at the intersection of three factors. The first factor is, did they contribute to the campaign or not? Before the election. Now, Ripple executives, they contributed after the election, and so they were able to get a meeting with Trump after the election. But that does not count a lot on the ledger. And then the second question is about voters. So, does adding XRP to the strategic reserve get them more voters? No, right? It's just bots on Twitter, right? So it's not, those people don't vote unless it's for Democrats. And third is it good policy or not? And so when we look at what are the strategic interests of the United States, is subsidizing press releases about bank partnerships in the strategic interest of the United States and the people and the public? No, it's not. This is just a subsidy for a failure of a California, company. So I'm very skeptical that they're going to make any progress at all in getting XRP into a strategic reserve. What they could accomplish is to derail the strategic Bitcoin reserve and to have an attitude of, well, if we're not in it, then we're opposed to it. And the reason why they want to do that is because their whole narrative, their whole marketing shtick for going after those retail dollars is to pretend that they have an in with the government, with institutions. And so if it's self-evident that they don't really actually have any influence in DC, they only have the appearance of influence because, XRP is not in the reserve, then that dismantles their narrative. And so they always want to have some kind of plausible deniability of, and it's much better for them if there's no strategic Bitcoin reserve because then, it makes sure for them that there's not some kind of endorsement of Bitcoin and non-endorsement of Ripple and XRP. And so ultimately, that's why they are really, they're gunning for two different outcomes. Either no strategic reserve at all, or a strategic reserve with XRP. And those are the only two outcomes that they want, because those are the only two outcomes that make sense for their business.
Wow. Well, but hold on. Why the part where I'm a bit I don't want to say confused because that's not the correct word. Perplexed, maybe that's the correct word, is why the Trump team would go for something like this, especially after one of the Ripple co-founders donated $10 million to Kamala. Why would they even bite into something that? And then I'll add a little bit more context. Part of Trump's executive order explicitly forbade the development of a central bank digital currency, which Ripple is actively doing. Do you have any insights on that? Yo, I want to tell you about the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. I'm talking about bitcoinwell.com. What makes bitcoinwell.com different is that it's a completely non-custodial platform, meaning as soon as you buy Bitcoin and the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. And that perfectly aligns with the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state. Support Bitcoin on-ramps that are self-custody by default. To get started, go to bitcoinwell.com today. It takes 2 to 5 minutes to sign up, and bada bing, bada boom, you're ready to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I think that there's no loss or harm to them to say digital assets instead of Bitcoin. Right. They're just trying to avoid having a political fight because they're trying to get the executive order out the door. And so I don't think that's concerning at all. And I think that from their perspective, if people want to debate this, they should not debate it within the executive branch. They should debate it within the legislative branch, where we have Senator Lummis, who is the head of the Digital Assets Subcommittee. And who is the author of the Bitcoin Act that would formalize a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for the Trump administration to say, hey, look, if this is controversial, let's let the legislature handle it. The White House already has its plate full. And I'll add, the White House has done a fantastic job since the inauguration. And of course, during the transition and preparing for this, of getting things done. So they don't want drama to get in the way of getting things done, even though, they see Brad Garlinghouse having an absolute meltdown and crying about Bitcoin maximalism. They don't want to be associated with Brad doing that. And so they want to focus on getting things done. So I think the executive order is fine as it is. In fact, I think it's great that it got a lot of our priorities in there. And at the end of the day, what counts is legislation. Because look, let's be clear. Yes, Trump is president for the next 4 years. There will be another election, right? There will be other presidents in the future. If the strategic reserve got accomplished through an executive order, it can get reversed through an executive order. What we want to have it enacted by Congress, and so that's what we're looking forward to.
Yeah, and the part where and that's a very I really appreciate that perspective and the insight into, look, they use the word digital assets. They didn't want the political pushback. I inferred from what you said, Pierre, that you believe that this executive order thing is going to come through. Like, we're going to have a Bitcoin executive order by the end of 2025. I don't want to put you in a position to yes or no.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an executive order. I think that it would be passing the Bitcoin Act that Senator Lummis has drafted. Now, whether that gets done this year or not is really going to depend on our audience of whether they are calling their congressmen and congresswomen to prioritize this legislation. And I also think that it might also depend on the Bitcoin price, right? So if the Bitcoin price continues to increase, it will continue to put tremendous pressure on the legislature to prioritize passing this so that we don't miss out on further gains.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize on that too, Pierre, which is the Republicans have a slight majority in the House, and they have a somewhat slight majority in the Senate, but it's not filibuster proof. And you really need 60 votes. So you need Democrats going across the aisle to support this. Now, I did ask Senator Lummis about this last week, and she told me that there is bipartisan support. Senator Gillibrand apparently is signed to the bill as well. So, however, the actions of the Democratic Party, and again, it's not monolithic, and I want to be specific here, but specifically last year, what we saw was tremendous amount of hostility from the White House and from the Warren camp. And there was a bill that was introduced in the House that specifically forbade the introduction of a central bank digital currency, and it was across party lines. There were some Democrats that voted for the bill that would ban a CBDC, but it was basically like Democrats against, Republicans for. I think we both agree that the last thing we want to happen is for this to become a partisan issue, because every presidential election is just going to swing, and that would be a terrible thing for the Bitcoin industry, Bitcoin entrepreneurs in the United States. So I want to get your insights on that one.
Yeah, so if we look back at how Biden got elected, he had to persuade Elizabeth Warren to support him. And the give there was tremendous influence over financial regulations in the United States. And so Elizabeth Warren, for the past 4 years, on all questions financial related, she was the point person. She was leading on the issues. Today, because of the results of the election, not only does she have zero power, from a political perspective, but she's also lost a lot of influence among Democrats because she lost them votes. Lots of crypto voters, lots of Bitcoin voters were energized to go vote Republican because of Elizabeth Warren's misguided antics. And so even for Democrats who don't understand the issue, they're looking at the polling numbers, and that's really important to them, is who's voting for what. And they see that absolutely nobody votes based on being anti-crypto, right? There is no anti-crypto army at all. It was all just a charade. And so the only, and Sherrod Brown, he was the chair of the banking committee in the Senate. He lost his election to Bernie Moreno, who is pro-Bitcoin. And so, you've got the top person among Democrats. He got kicked out because of his anti-crypto stance. And so it's a completely different picture, not just from the perspective that the Republicans are in the majority, but also from the perspective that among Democrats, Elizabeth Warren is now seen as a stick in the mud who is very reactionary and backwards and not progressive at all on this issue.
Yeah, and why do you think, what were the motivations behind Elizabeth Warren? Why was she so against Bitcoin? Like, we know that she's a supporter of central bank digital currencies. Why is she taking this, I don't know if this is the correct term, I'm going to say it anyways, Pierre, this unholy crusade against our industry? What's going on there behind, what are Elizabeth Warren's motivations? Why does she hate us so much, man? It's kind of rude.
Yeah, so I'm not a psychiatrist, but I'm going to go ahead and diagnose her right now. She has Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And so what that is that you'll have a mother who will care for a sick child, and she'll get, lots of medical attention for the sick child, but the child's not actually sick, right? Or she's making the child sick in order to fulfill this nurturing instinct of a mother. And so in the case of Elizabeth Warren, the child is financial consumers. And she's making them sick with inflation and this fiat economy. And then she gets to come in and care for them with her Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and all of her financial regulations. And so she's fulfilling a deep psychological need through this. It's from the outside, it's like very disturbing that, this person's exercising political power because she's mentally ill. And so that's, I think, what's going on here. And it's something that goes back very far in her, career, that she's always, had this tilt. Now, I think that's also why she's a bit of on her own island, right? That there's not a whole lot of people who are on board with her agenda, because most people are not suffering from this mental illness, and so they don't feel the same need to look after the financial consumers.
Yeah, and what is your what was your take on Gary Gensler? Because I heard this the other day, and it was hilarious, but it was something along the lines of, when they saw the Trump coin launch, they're like, you know what? Gary was right. So what is your take on Gary? Was he stuck in a difficult situation? Because I remember him speaking highly of Bitcoin, but at the same time, as you and I both know, and that's the next thing I want to explore, there was a lot of things happening in the background last year in order to really isolate our industry from the traditional financial system.
Yeah, so I think that, with regards to isolating from the financial system, I think that that's really, Operation Choke Point 2.0 and Marty Greenberg. But it is also Gary Gensler in the sense that they did not want crypto or Bitcoin to become enmeshed with the financial system through the securities markets. And so they wanted to keep Bitcoin out of the securities markets. And that's why they've been blocking the ETF for so long. Gary Gensler, if we're going to look at what his motivations are, I think that first and foremost, his motivation was political power, right? He has the Latin for it is libido dominandi, just the thirst for power. It's kind of an ego thing. And he saw the role at the SEC as a stepping stone to being Treasury Secretary. And so that's kind of where he wanted to land next. Now, that didn't happen for two reasons. One is that Kamala lost the election. Two is that Gary didn't really do a good job at the SEC, even from the perspective of Elizabeth Warren, right? Which is that he was losing cases left and right. Famously, he made zero progress on his case against XRP. And here we are, coming full circle. And so I think that Gary was too much of, he's like an academic, right? I think that's where Gary does great, in the classroom. I think that's, he's a good professor. He likes to teach. But But from a managerial perspective, what I've read from the reporting, which I don't know if it's true or not, is that he wasn't a great manager. He's not a great people person in terms of helping folks get things done. And he's not a great leader. And so that's why he really struggled in the role at the SEC. So going forward, obviously the floodgates are open. And so whether it's Bitcoin or crypto, the securities markets are going to be flooded with new securities. And we can debate the merits of those securities. But I actually think it's good that the SEC is going back to being merit neutral, which is that they're saying, hey, look, like, we don't care if you securitize Dogecoin or SHIB or whatever, as long as you're correctly disclosing everything to the public investors, knock yourselves out. And I think that's a proper role for a regulator. Once you start picking winners and losers from a securities perspective, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense because the SEC should not be a hedge fund manager that is trying to decide what's going to go up or down.
I mean, it's not their role, right? It's not their role. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was the which I find poetic as well, right? Which is the final release of the ETF. They dragged their feet on this. The account got hacked. There was tremendous volatility. The purpose of the SEC is to prevent market manipulation, but it was their Twitter handle that enabled market manipulation. They completely overstepped, I guess, their role. Now, I know that the new chair, I think her name is Hester Pierce, if my memory serves me correctly, she's a lot more open to this. And, the whole idea of the repeal of the SAB 121, I think it's called SAB 122 these days. But what's that going to enable? How significant was the repeal of that regulation? And I believe that was a regulation by executive action or it wasn't regulation via legislation.
Yeah, that's correct. So the nominee for the SEC to be the chair of the commission is Paul Atkins.
Okay.
Now, Commissioner Pierce was on his staff when he was previously on the SEC, and she is now herself a commissioner. And I've met her personally. She's a wonderful person. I've also read her opinions on different issues, and I agree with her. She's very pro innovation. So I think that it's great that Paul Atkins is aligned with that agenda. I'm sorry. What was the question?
So I guess the question is the significance of the repeal of SAB 121. What's that going to do?
Yeah, so that was something that Gary Gensler tried to sneak in as a favor for Elizabeth Warren to prevent banks from custodying Bitcoin and other digital assets. And so that was really, it's all about capital controls, right? And trying to keep things separate. Now, the way they tried to do this was malicious by weaponizing accounting guidance to try to make it so that banks have to hold lots of what's called regulatory capital against any cryptos or Bitcoin that they hold. And so in practice, what that could look like is if you, as a bank, let's say you're going to hold Bitcoin on behalf of somebody, so they're going to have one Bitcoin in their checking account. You're going to hold one Bitcoin on your balance sheet. It's 100% reserve. And on top of that, you have to hold $100,000 worth of treasury securities, right? Of bonds. It's like, doesn't make any sense at all because it's already full reserve. And so, but they would go further and say, no, you have to hold like 5 times the number of treasury securities because Bitcoin is so risky. It could go to negative $500,000. It's like just complete nonsense. And so SAB 121, people tried to get rid of it through the legislative process. It passed the House and the Senate to get rid of it. And President Biden, obviously, he had no idea what he was signing, but he vetoed it. And so highly partisan decision on his staffer's part. Maybe we should find out who actually, signed it or told him to sign it. But that was day one, promises made, promises kept. They got rid of SOB 121. And so what we'll see going forward, and I'm really hopeful on this, is that instead of having to go sign up at Coinbase to go buy Bitcoin, you'll just be able to do it from your existing bank account, right? So you don't have to go KYC AML, a second time, right? You just got to do it once at JP Morgan Chase or a Bank of America or wherever you normally do your banking. You'll just be able to directly buy Bitcoin there and then withdraw it to your self-custody using Lightning or on-chain directly from your bank. And I think that that's just much more practical and will accelerate hyper-Bitcoinization.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask you something else, Pierre. Where are we in the hyper? No, you know what? Before I ask that question, so there's what I call the altcoin, to put it nicely, extravaganza, right? The Trump coin launched, the Melania Trump launched, and I think that what we're going to see over the next 2 or 3 years is, of course, number go up, but also like the absolute, full steam ahead, meme coin explosion, hyper gambling. I don't know what to call it. You can make a very strong case that people will get hurt with all of this happening. And by people getting hurt, doesn't it play into the political narrative of Gary Gensler? Doesn't it play into the political narrative of Elizabeth Warren? And like you said earlier, a lot of people they don't even know what Bitcoin is. They're not insensitive. They just, it's like, what did you watch for the game last night type of mentality. What happens if there's this inevitable, meme coin explosion? A lot of people get wrecked, and the political winds in the United States turn to, they're right. Like, we do need some type of regulation, and people are not able to differentiate the difference between the Bitcoin and crypto community, crypto industry, and Bitcoin kind of gets in the crossfire. I don't know if that question makes sense, but it is a concern of mine, just because of he launched Trump coin, man. It's like 80% down, I think. It's ridiculous.
So I think first we have our role to play as Bitcoin educators, right? So you, lots of others are doing a great job of helping as many people as possible learn the easy way why you should be Bitcoin only. And I think that that's a duty we have. It's a moral obligation, and we should all continue to do that. Second of all, we have to create products that make it easier for people, right? So whether it's improving software to make Bitcoin easier to use, creating more hardware wallets that make self-custody easier, but also creating financial products that make it easier for people. So the number one complaint people have had about Bitcoin, there's really two complaints about Bitcoin. One is it's too volatile, right? So that's where I think that, creating securities that help reduce Bitcoin's financial volatility while still giving people exposure to the upside, right? But limiting the downside is good. And we're seeing those being developed, and they will continue to be developed. And the other side of that coin is the people who complain about Bitcoin not being volatile enough, right? So they are constantly trying to outperform Bitcoin, and that's why they're attracted to all these illiquid altcoins. And so that's where, again, we got to create financial products that give them additional leverage so that they can be exposed to more Bitcoin volatility times 2 or times 5, right? And those are actually two very complementary financial products. And I don't think that it's just MicroStrategy that's going to continue to develop those. I think that there's going to be a whole cottage industry of Bitcoin-backed securities that are helping new investors who, for whatever reason, spot Bitcoin is either not volatile enough or too volatile for them. So let's meet them where they're at and create products that, cater to their needs. So yeah, education, better products, and of course, there's going to be folks who, despite number one and number two that I just discussed, still can't help themselves, right? They're going to degen, and they need to learn the hard way. And I think that they will learn the hard way. And that, Brian Armstrong had a tweet the other day that millions of tokens are being launched every day. And so there's no stopping these people, right? Because it's permissionless. Even if you have Gary Gensler's regulations, well, what happened with Gary Gensler was that it just went offshore to FTX, and then people use a VPN, and then they get wrecked even harder because they're like, oh, I'm going to go to FTX. I'm going to go buy my diversified bag, right? I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. I'm going to buy some SHIB. I'm going to buy some FTT. I'm going to buy all of these different tokens. And then because it's offshore and there's literally, zero regulation, that they don't just get rugged on their altcoins, they also get rugged on their Bitcoin, right? And so I think it actually is good to bring this onshore. And even if we disagree with the altcoins, to have it so that if somebody buys Bitcoin at an altcoin casino, that they're going to be made whole on their Bitcoin, even if all the altcoins go to zero. And so I don't buy the idea that we need to have the government ban these domestically and to drive this activity offshore where people get wrecked even harder. So people are going to learn the hard way because everything goes to zero versus Bitcoin. Everything's going to get demonetized, whether it's real estate, altcoins, all the rest. So those are my three thoughts on that question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. An incredible answer, like always, Pierre. And now I saved the best for last because we are getting close to the top of the hour, 10 minutes left or so. What really happened during Operation Choke Point 2.0? I'll give you like my perspective as a content creator. Maybe it gives you a little bit of insight, but I went from thinking, okay, they're just not informed on this, to by the time the Samurai Wallet guys were essentially, sentenced and whatever, and they used the Tornado Cash as a precedent. And then quickly after, a month after, the Samurai guys, it was like a slow creep. And then you heard about the proposed 30% mining tax. And then you had all the legacy media, like a coordinated attack using the word terrorism, using this is bad for the environment. It was like a full court press. If you weren't paying attention, it was without a doubt happening. What really happened during Operation Choke Point 2.0? Was it malicious? Was it on purpose?
So we can rewind back in 2014, I believe it was. I was doing some consulting and I thought, well, gee, I should set up a legal entity and open up a business bank account, right? And so it was called Bitcoin Advisory LLC. And I created on LegalZoom. And then I go to my local JP Morgan Chase, branch, and I'm like, hey, I'd like to open a business bank account. Here's my paperwork. And the guy's like, Bitcoin? There's no way we're opening you a business bank account. And so, the banking industry from day zero has viewed Bitcoin suspiciously as high risk and has not wanted to bank Bitcoin businesses. And so, that only continued, and it got amplified. And I think it got amplified to such a degree that not only was it about the risk of money laundering, it became a political thing where even, for example, the Trump organization and Melania Trump, she got debanked by her bank, right? And so then it's like, okay, we're not just talking about people being worried about Bitcoin. We're talking about the whole banking system being weaponized to punish the enemy of progressives, of Democrats, of whoever's in power, right? And so I I think that it really it goes back to the supervisory nature of the FDIC, where they look at the risk profile of banks and they have a checklist. And one of the items on that checklist is reputational risk. And they can put anything under reputational risk, right? Of, oh, a gun store. Well, that's reputational risk because what if there's a mass shooting and blah, 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 like so on and so forth. And so they've been using reputational risk as a catch-all to not bank people they disagree with politically. And that has to stop. And so I know that there's legislation that is going to address this, but, I don't even think that any amount of legislation would really fix this. It's going to continue to happen. And the only answer is to have an alternative, right? Which is that if we make it such that anybody can self-custody Bitcoin, then it doesn't really matter if they get debanked because they can go spend their sats using Lightning at the grocery store and they don't need a bank account. And so that's really, I think, what the Trump administration has to prioritize is let's get rid of capital gains taxes on payments. Let's make it super easy for you to not need a bank account so that when Democrats are back in power, or even if a Republican administration goes haywire and starts punishing its political enemies, it's a moot point because now you can pay for your abortion with Bitcoin or whatever it is. I'm pro-life, but I'm just using a kind of an example of what would be a partisan issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a very, very thorough and great explanation. And I'll say this, Pierre, what happens when 5 to 10 to 15% of the US population have their savings in Bitcoin in self-custody? What happens? I feel like the dynamics of politics is going to change. Perhaps there's an impact on the financial system. And then this goes back to the theory from kind of like the sovereign individual, where they essentially make the case that information technologies is essentially going to make politics irrelevant over the long term. And they have so much importance. And the way that I see it in the most simplistic fashion is essentially like voting is essentially a popularity contest to see which side gets control of the money printer. That's the way I see it. I think that if you remove the money printer element out of that, it changes a lot of political philosophies. Again, I'm really inclusive in my messaging, but the whole concept of, mass scale wealth redistribution via monetary debasement, right? I'll just leave it at that. So want to get your opinion on the long-term implications to the political discussion, the political situation of Bitcoin kind of being, adopted on a worldwide level.
Yeah, I think it's going to drive political decentralization. And so while today everybody knows who the president is and nobody knows who their mayor is or who's on the board of their HOA, I think that's going to get flipped upside down. I think that long term, people won't even know who the president is, but they certainly will know who their local elected officials are because of the political decentralization that will happen. And I think we're already kind of seeing it with the talk of how many strategic Bitcoin reserves there will be at the state level. There are bills that are making progress perhaps at a faster pace than we'll see at the federal level. And so when we look at the history of humanity, when we're in a situation where we have a sound money, we end up with much smaller city states, right? With much more local governance. And I think that's good for human liberty. I think that, people will be able to live where they want to live and have more prosperity ultimately. So that's where I see it going long term.
Absolutely. And I think the world's going to be a much better place for it. And I really appreciate you joining me today. I always enjoy our conversations, and it was very enlightening. Your perspectives on a lot of this. I know that you do incredible research on all this. Now that if Bitcoin continues its historical pattern, this year is going to be good to us. Do you have any final words for Bitcoiners that are listening? What they should be looking forward to in the future? Words of advice for someone who's been in the industry for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I goes back to Odell's stay humble and stack sats. Keep your head screwed on straight. I've seen over the years lots of people lose their minds and either rage quit or get distracted or whatever it is. And so my advice is to take care of yourself. Don't get distracted, and continue to focus on learning more about Bitcoin and helping those who want to be helped. Right? There's lots of people who don't want to be helped, so don't waste too much energy on them, and really focus on the folks around you who are curious and open-minded.
Oh, well, I appreciate great advice, and Pierre, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.